Hi, this is Andrew, and this is Keen On, the daily chat show featuring the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello, everybody. We haven't done a show for a little while on India. We did a couple of interesting ones a year or two ago, one with my old friend Vivek Wadhwa, on what America gets wrong about India. Vivek tends to be rather bullish on India. He's an Indian living in America. Not everyone is quite as bullish. We had Samit Basu, who believes that India might represent our high-tech dystopian future, so rather dark vision. And then we've done lots of shows about Indian literature and the problems and challenges of working in technology and what it means to be an Indian. Our guest today is not just another Indian, but one of India's most distinguished figures. Raghuram Rajan is Raghuram Rajan, and I'm sure I've mangled his name. Is perhaps India's most famous economist. He was the director of research at the IMF and also the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. And amazingly enough, he teaches at Chicago Business School, where he's talking to us from, and he has a mock X account with over 122,000 followers. So he's quite a fellow, and he's also the co-author of a new book, Breaking the Mold, India's Untraveled Path to Prosperity. And he's joining us from Chicago. Raghu, welcome and congratulations on the new book. This idea you pursue in the book, India's untraveled path to prosperity, is this a unique path? Are you talking about India creating a new paradigm, a post-Chinese paradigm for economic development?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. And absolutely, I think our central point in the book is the China way doesn't work anymore. And probably, even if it did, it's not the best path for India. And, we explain why. And then we talk about this alternative path, which actually no developing country has followed before, partly because, the technology wasn't there to do it. But it's emerged. The technology has emerged. And it's a path which emphasizes much less, manufacturing and much more services, especially high-skilled services, as a way to grow. And India is already on this path. It's the fifth largest. It exports about 5% of global services. On the manufacturing side, it's more of a midget. It's less than 2%. So it's already on this path. There are an enormous number of Indians now employed, not just in IT services, but in everything from legal services to consulting to telemedicine. They are providing services across the world. And the pandemic has really led to an explosion of this kind of export. And what we are arguing is, this can become the leading sector for India, even while obviously you have to do everything else to employ people, including lower end services, lower end manufacturing. All that will happen. But if you want a leading sector, this is a possibility today, which didn't exist before. And India has the human capital, not enough of it, but has some of it to provide it. And the world is going to India to look for it.
You began, Raghu, with a rather explosive statement. I'm quoting you. The China way doesn't work anymore. What is the China way, or what was the China way?
Well, I'd put the label China way because it's the most recent exponent of that way. But it was following on a path that, probably was first started on by Japan and then Taiwan, Korea, and so on. And it basically consists of starting with low-skilled assembly, and doing other low-skilled manufacturing like producing garments. That essentially employs people coming out of agriculture, and once you can employ more of these people outside of agriculture, you have a certain amount of profitability because you have cheap labor, and you're competing with developed countries with your cheap labor, even though you don't have the same kind of infrastructure, the same kind of legal system, etc. Your firms make profits. Workers are paid more than they would have, been paid in agriculture. They start investing in themselves. The country starts taxing the firms, starts investing in infrastructure, better infrastructure, and you climb up the ladder. You get, from producing screws and garments to producing the best electric vehicles in the world, which is where China is today. So that path is what I call the China path. Climb on steadily more value added, more skilled manufacturing. And the problem for India is multifold here. One, China's already there, and you're no longer competing with highly paid workers in the West. You're competing with workers that China is now hiring out of its Western provinces, straight from agriculture. So one is China's there, but so are Vietnam and Bangladesh. So you're competing with a lot of emerging markets. I think the second big problem is the West is much less open to yet another flood of manufacturing imports. While I think uh, manufacturing fetishism is overdone in countries, everybody wants to produce everything because of some fear that they will be shut out in some future pandemic or in some future war. Uh, I think that temperament leads to much more protectionism, and the US is no longer staving off protectionism across the world. It's no longer managing the global economic rules in the way it used to. And I think when you put those together, both the path is more difficult, and it doesn't necessarily lead to the kind of size of exports that India needs to develop. And so it has to find something else than what China did.
So you talk about this China way, the China path, which, as you said, is a path that's been trod also, if that's the right word, by Japan and Taiwan and Vietnam, many other developing countries. What has been, Raghu, the India path to date? Because India is a successfully developing economy, perhaps even a developed economy. What is it now? The fifth largest economy in the world. I think it just overtook the UK. What has its achievements been to date? How has it got to where it is now?
Well, first, India uh, pales only when compared with China or with Korea, two very, very successful emerging markets. But when you look at Indian growth over the last 3 decades, ever since liberalization, it's been on average around 6%. Hugely creditable for any country to grow at that pace. So the India path, whatever it is, has been reasonable. The problem India faces today is that it's not enough. It's not enough because, on the one hand,
No,
uh,
I take it. But before we get to it
yeah,
not being enough, tell me what it is. You talked about a kind of post-statist, post-socialist economy.
yeah,
Let's give some credit. What has happened in India over the last 30 or 40 years to get it to where it is today?
it's well. First, it liberalized. It did away with many of the rules and regulations that were strangling business. It removed the red tape. Thou shalt not produce more than thus and such amount without getting permission from the ministry. Thou shalt not import without paying huge tariffs. It got rid of a lot of that. And that liberalization set off the first phase of growth in the 1990s.
Who should we who should take the credit for this? Is
Well,
it an
I think two.
individual? I mean, you've been involved
Yeah,
in Indian economics, running the Bank of India.
yeah.
Is there a single individual who should take credit for this?
I think two. I mean, obviously, the moment comes for India. The moment came in a time of crisis when India had to go back to the IMF for funding, etc. But I think two people deserve a lot of credit. The finance minister at that time, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and the prime minister at that time, who facilitated the political room for Dr. Manmohan Singh to do his thing, and that was Mr. Narasimha Rao. So those two, I think, should be credited for that first wave of reforms, which were immensely successful and created it created a waking tiger from really a sleeping tiger.
Raghu, again, you teach in Chicago, you live in America. You don't need me to tell you this, but there's a tremendous criticism now of the so-called neoliberal reforms of Reagan and Thatcher in the 80s, which many people believe has created the conditions of inequality and populism in the UK and the US today. Did what the deregulated Indian economy, does it reflect that sort of neoliberal Thatcherite Reagan approach, or is it in itself a third way, or was it a third way?
Well, I think there's something to what you're saying, that the old Indian socialism, which didn't quite benefit the people, but it was a good thing to think. We want equality, but we sort of got equality in poverty. We kept everybody down, but that helps in offsetting some of the more um, sort of difficult aspects of free markets. You want more competition, but you don't want to have absolute trust that the private sector player will do what is right. You want to keep an eye on what is going on. That sort of middle path, I think, which many countries sort of muddle through to get there. I think in India, you were trying to liberalize from a period of socialism. And so there was only so much you could do. So, for example, we didn't go immediately into privatizing all the public sector entities without the regulatory capacity to keep the new, the emerging private sector regulate some of them adequately. So I think this was a middle path, if you will. I don't think it was unique, but I think it was something which ensured that the change was largely beneficial. And you saw incomes at the bottom also increase quite a bit. And a lot of Indians came out of poverty. In fact, one of the signal achievements today is it's very few Indians are in abject poverty today. We've spread the safety net to such a point that, yeah, they're poor by the standards of almost any country, but the kind of destitution that we saw is far less than it used to be.
Yeah, it's ironic that there seems to be more destitution now on the streets of San Francisco than there are on the streets of New Delhi. Just remind everyone, Raghu, because not everyone is as literate about India as of course you are, just the size of the country, the number of people, and the cultural and religious diversity of the place.
Yeah. No, so it's a huge country, right? And not so much geographically, though it's big there also. If I remember my geography, 3.2 million square kilometers, but I may be wrong. It was many years ago that I
I
studied.
doubt it, Raghu. I don't think you're ever wrong. You're not.
Yeah, no, but 1.4 billion people today, and it has a number of states. Each of those states is as big as a country. As a big country, the state of Uttar Pradesh has 240 million people, and that's part of the problem that we talk about in this book. That even our states have become really too big to be managed from the state capital, that India needs a lot more decentralization to be able to run the country effectively. There are, by some counts, 600 languages, many of them dialects. There we have a whole range of populations, from what have traditionally been called tribals. Um, in Hindi, it's sometimes referred to as Vanvasi, people who live in the jungle. They don't anymore, but that used to be the traditional appellation. We have, right to we have herders in the Himalayas. We have agriculturists in the plains. Many languages, many religions. 80% of India is Hindu, around 14% Muslim. We are probably the third biggest country by Muslim population, after Indonesia and Pakistan.
And the
So,
complexity, of course, the political complexity of that, perhaps we'll talk about. What about as a good economist, you've sidestepped politics so far. In this post-socialist Indian, mostly successful economic experiment, the India path, what broadly has been the politics of post-socialist India? Did it go together with a cult? What you talked about, a manufacturing fetishism. Did it go together with a free market fetishism, or was it more subtle than that?
we've never gone to an extreme thus far on the political side, which is interesting because there has been broadly a consensus about the direction. Yes, we have communists in parliament who say, you're privatizing too much, you're going towards too much market, and then we have, we have a few who would be called libertarian by Western standards, who will say, get the government out of business, get the government out of managing everything, and we've got many shades in between. So, in some sense, what happens is, one, there is this constant attempt to get consensus, which works well for the country when there is a sufficiently large opposition, and second, what then emerges is, you know every change of government brings a change in shades of policy, but not an abrupt reversal of policy. So you will have one government which sort of is more pro-business, which will pass a bunch of reforms on the business side, and then the next government will say, okay, we had a pretty substantial period of growth. Now let's redistribute a little more so that the fruits are widely spread. That worked reasonably well. The problem for India comes when uh, a single party gets too much of a majority for too long of a period, and then policies get accentuated.
Is that theory, Raghu, or practice? Are you talking about the Modi government?
No, I think there have been other periods, in the 60s, when the 50s and 60s, when the Congress government was dominant. And now, of course, the Modi government has been dominant for the last 10 years, and certainly there is an expectation that it will come back. Though I think this election is more contested than people think. That said, if it does come back, it would be 15 years of the same government.
Are you
And so
admirer of the economic achievements of the Modi government?
I think they're a mixed bag. I think there are some which are really commendable, some reforms which are commendable, and then there are some which are completely wrong-headed, and so it is a mixed bag.
Would you take your old job back if he offered it to you?
I've been there, done that. Perfectly happy with my job.
But is there a political element to your commentary on Modi? You had an interesting piece in the FT earlier this week about trading democracy for prosperity as a false choice for Indians. You're trying to make sense of the popularity of the Modi government. You seem to suggest that perhaps, even though India isn't doing as well as it could economically now, people have been seduced by the the populism of Modi? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know whether the right word is seduced, but when you hear the election interviews that are going on right now, when they talk to voters, you hear concerns about unemployment, which is the single biggest economic concern people have. And at the same time, they think well of the prime minister, sometimes absolve him of any responsibility for their economic condition, while thanking him for some of the benefits they get, which where clearly the delivery of benefits like free food and some of the cash transfers has certainly improved over the 10 years of this government. So, I mean, they certainly are thankful for the ways their lives have improved, but to what extent they hold the government responsible for the ways their life hasn't improved remains to be seen. That's what this election is really about. What the opposition is trying to emphasize is that the government hasn't done very much on job creation, and joblessness is squarely their responsibility. And of course, the government refuses to see that there's a joblessness problem and instead focuses on other issues.
We are speaking with Raghuram Rajan, the co-author of Breaking the Mold, India's Untraveled Path to Prosperity, is perhaps India's most famous living economist, done all sorts of amazing things. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with Rajan to talk about why the Indian path, or the potential Indian path, might be important not just to India, but to the rest of the world. But I want to remind everyone that amazing guests like Raghu Rajan are brought to us because of our friends at Liberties, an excellent new quarterly journal. We're going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then we'll be back to talk more India and third way. So don't go away, anyone.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas, it's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Raghu Rajan, the co-author of Breaking the Mold, a very, very famous, world famous, not just Indian economist, but economist teaching at the Booth School, the business school at the University of Chicago. Raghu, in 2020, you wrote a book, The Third Pillar, How Markets and the State Leave the Community Behind. You've always been a little bit of a third way man, my sense is. You also wrote a book, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. You are a capitalist, although you're not an unvarnished admirer of all capitalists. Is the Indian model the one you're beginning to chart, the Indian path in this new book? Is it a third way for the 21st century, Raghu?
Well, I'm not sure it's necessarily a new model or a model for the rest of the world. I do think that some of what I talked about in the third pillar sort of emerges in this book. One of the concerns that India has is that elections are not about public services, better health, better education, better childcare, but it's much more about how much shall I give you in freebies, in free food, in free cooking gas, and so on. And part of the reason we think that is true is India is really centralized. And so, from the state capital, even if you're vying for a state level position rather than a national level position, you have no incentive to talk about healthcare and education. Those take too long to actually change. What you can talk about is, I'm going to provide free bicycles to girls because they will then have something to ride on to school, or I'm going to provide free meals at schools. Where there has been change, demonstrable change in improving the quality of healthcare education, is in the more decentralized states. Delhi, for example, is virtually a municipality. It has its own government. they have worked hard on providing healthcare and education, so much so that the government-run schools are as good in terms of results now as the private schools. And similarly, the southern states of Kerala, Tamil Nadu do much better on education and healthcare than the northern states. So the ideas from that book percolate into this book in saying that India needs to decentralize far more in order to do better on the health and education that the public desperately need. Now, this need not be provided by the government, but it needs to be provided for by the government, especially to our poor people. How do they get to invest in the future? What is amazing is how much of a difference education can make in just the span of one generation. And so we offer a number of examples in this book, but there's, the one that strikes me the most is this guy who's the son of a laborer on the farms in Kerala. He's picking ginger root, his father. The son goes to school, like all Indian children, they start school, but they don't stay in school because they fall behind. They don't have the backing at home. They can't do the homeworks. And this kid fails in sixth grade, goes back to the farm to work with his father. A kind teacher comes to the farm and says, "Why are you back on the farm?" He says, "Well, I failed." And teacher says, "Look, try again, because this is your only way out, and it's important you do it." He challenges the kid, encourages the kid, and the kid, succeeds. He tops his class in math, gets a job, and then becomes an entrepreneur. And today he, runs a business which sells idli batter. I don't know if you've had idlis. This is a rice cake that you have in South Indian restaurants.
Yeah, I've been to Kerala actually.
He sells fresh idli batter. Interesting selling proposition, because housewives who have outside jobs don't have the time to grind it, but they still want to make the batter to show people that they're doing, they're great cooks. And so he caters to that market. And it's a very brisk selling market. They get fresh idli batter. They make those nice rice cakes, and he employs 2,500 people. But a fantastic story of, from rags to riches in one generation, using the power of education. And I think again and again you can see this. I saw it when I was at the Reserve Bank. The lowest level employee, they weren't paid much, but they could afford a house in Mumbai because that was government provided, and they could send their kids to good schools. We met the next generation in parties that we gave at our house, and they were, bank managers, software engineers. They had transcended into upper middle class in one generation. And so what we need to do, I think, in India, in this new way of growth, is figure out how we can effect that transformation much more widely. And that means getting these public services to people in a much better way, implies some decentralization of funds, functions, powers, and functionaries, but also implies that this is where we need to put our resources, rather than in, Taj Mahal-like entities.
India then is a large version, perhaps the Asian version potentially of Denmark, the model for responsible government services. Has Modi not given much priority to government services? What's his sort of public-facing attitude to the role of government, local governments or central government?
I think it's the talk is of decentralization, what they call cooperative federalism. The actions are of centralization. Let's take power into Delhi, and within Delhi, take power into the Prime Minister's office. So the talk, they don't walk the talk. And I think that is an issue, because Modi is one of the most charismatic prime ministers India has had, and so power flows naturally within the country and within the party to him, and he is I mean, it gets centralized in the prime minister's office. India is too big to be governed from that small narrow office. And it shows because some of the sort of attempts at reform by the government, for example, changing the agricultural laws, have floundered because the government hasn't developed a broader consensus by talking to many more people and persuading them that change is needed in the ways that they are trying to affect it. And so that law change prompted enormous opposition from the farmers. Some of it was politically orchestrated, but much of it was genuine. And eventually the law had to be taken back. So an important place for reform. Agriculture, as you know, is so central to India's adaptation needs under climate change, but didn't happen because there wasn't enough consensus building. To some extent, we need to take advantage of our democracy rather than restrict it.
Yeah, you bring up the D word, Raghu. Couple more questions. I know you got to run. You suggest in the FT that trading democracy for prosperity is a false choice. Is that what Modi, in a sense, perhaps is offering, suggesting that he needs more power, implicitly meaning that democracy is less important than prosperity?
Again, I think when you hear the talk, it's all about how we are the world's greatest democracy, and how they're Democrats to the last inch. Um, in the walk, not so clear. When you use tax authorities to go after political opposition, when you use the investigative authorities to go after politicians that aren't on your side, while magically the cases against those who come over to your side suddenly go slow or disappear. That seems a lot less democratic than one might wish. But the most important sort of concern is that the government doesn't get feedback. Because you suppress criticism, because you are unhappy with criticism that comes through the press, because the press wants to stay by your side because it gets enormous sort of benefits in terms of government ads, in terms of government favors. You don't have as much of an open debate on the things that go wrong. And there have been things that have gone spectacularly wrong. The demonetization, for example, or India's response to COVID in the first and the second wave. India had a very, very well rolled out vaccination process, but after many people died in the first and the second wave. And some of those deaths were unnecessary if we had done the right thing before. No chance of inquiring into what happened. You have an inquiry in the United Kingdom about it. There has been a lot of press exposure in the United States, but India hasn't announced an inquiry into what happened. If you don't learn from your mistakes, how are you going to improve?
Yeah, so breaking the mold, in a sense, the system is a little moldy, perhaps. A couple more questions, Raghu, and then I said, as I know, you have to run. We haven't talked tech. India is a leader in technology and large tech companies and in Western companies with offices in India. What about the role of AI in all this? India is a developer of many AI services, as well as call centers. It has a huge population, and the issue of employment is central in the election and perhaps for the future of the country. Is India the stage in which the drama of AI is going to get played out in terms of prosperity versus jobs and the role of technology in our age of AI?
Almost surely every country is going to go through it, and India will. It's obviously adds to anxiety because we don't really know which way AI will change jobs. Clearly some jobs will be easier to do because of AI support. We're already seeing computer programming, for example, productivity improves 40-50%. Now, some people say, oh, this is a bad thing. We won't need programmers. No, we will need programmers. They'll be more productive. So there'll be more demand for programming because programming effectively becomes cheaper as a result. When will we get to AI completely devising programs of its own? I think that's still some way out in the future. But I think the pace at which it'll come, we don't know. It'll certainly be an aid for some jobs. It'll be a displacement for some jobs. Maybe that call center will start shutting down when we have sufficiently good AI to do the job. Now we're not there yet, and often the hype. Remember, 4 or 5 years ago, we thought we'd be in self-driving cars by now. It's still 4 or 5 years away, and it may be that is the way with some AI. I don't know, and almost surely AI will create new jobs. I mean, there's some research I'm already doing using AI, which was impossible when we had to use real live RAs. Because AI can read through thousands of documents and offer summary.
It's not going to replace my job, is it, Raghu?
What's that?
I'm not going to lose my job to AI.
I think all change takes place much more slowly than people think. Hopefully, we both retire before AI becomes really serious. I'm sort of comforted that it will be helpful, but I'm hopeful that radical change would take place more slowly. That said, I also want to say, if we have an abundance of AI doing some of the most tedious and the worst jobs, then the issue really becomes how do we redistribute the profits from the AI doing that, rather than necessarily lament that those jobs have gone. I mean, nobody in India would want to clean sewers, which they do today. If you had a robot doing it, that would be so much better. And it's doing it in developed countries. I think that kind of jobless displacement is a benefit. Similarly, my RAs would be really happy that the AI is reading thousands of boring documents rather than they being tasked to do it. They're just programming the AI at this point. So, my sense is, if you have belief that we will figure out the political redistribution that is needed, the only worry about AI has to be AI running amok and taking over the world, which I think other better minds are thinking about. But in terms of AI creating value and productivity, I don't think that's something to stand in the way of. We should embrace it, but then figure out how to redeploy resources to the people in need and the people displaced.
It'll be interesting to see if AI does successfully create machines to clean sewers in India, how that will impact the caste system. I just saw the movie Origins based on Wilkinson's book Caste. Final question, Raghu. I can't resist asking you this. In the final third of May 2024, the Dow is at 40,000. The American economy is booming. Back in 2008, you called the crisis. You were one of the brave people. Back actually in 2005, you warned about a crash. You didn't predict it would happen in 2008. How bullish are you on the current US economy and the broader global economy? Are we heading for another crash?
Well, who knows?
If you don't know, nobody.
People think once you were lucky in prediction. I'm not a perma bear, nor am I a permanent optimist. I think I do worry that the extent of optimism embedded in capital markets doesn't seem to me consistent with the extent of geopolitical pessimism that we see. The growing sort of confrontation between the U.S. and China, the possibility of a radically different U.S. presidency, the potential for the war in Ukraine, what happens there, as well as what's happening in Gaza. I think these are all flashpoints, but I think the wars are tips of the iceberg of growing discontent. And so, to my mind, markets don't do well in predicting geopolitical change. They act as if they're not going to happen. They minimize the probability. And so I do worry that something like that could be very, very disruptive. Are there deep underlying problems? Well, in the US, I think what is still to be unearthed is the full extent of the commercial real estate problem, which is winding its way up through bank balance sheets. They've done a little bit of extend and pretend, but they will have to recognize, when some of these loans mature and have to be renewed. Is that a systemic risk? Well, it's 500 to 800 billion dollars in terms of the size of loans and the size of losses that will have to be absorbed. Will be some fraction of that. But will there be a few banks that will be in difficulty? Possibly. Is it systemic? Not yet. But I think the longer things go without a correction, the more the chances are that we will see a correction. So this has been a fairly benign recovery from the pandemic, and the more things go in one direction, this is a pretty obvious statement.